I married something that wasn't all human. Even telling you the story now still sends chills down my spine. Story time. So I'm a reserved person. I'm very quiet. I'm laid back. I keep myself to myself. I don't really go out. If you see me going out, it's for occasions. Other than that, I like to stay at home most of the times. So on this particular Friday night, when my friends asked me to come out with them, I said no, because first of all, I wasn't feeling well that very night. But then again, it's not feeling well as in physically sick. I just wasn't myself that night, and I couldn't put a finger to what it was. So after they persisted, I decided to actually go out with them, because maybe that might actually cheer me up. That might actually cheer me up a bit. So I decided to go out with them. They go out on this nightclub. That's their go-to place all the time. I'm pretty familiar with it, but I decided to go anyway. We go out and we're having a good time. All of them are having fun. They're trying silly things. They're smoking things they shouldn't be smoking. And it's something that I would never actually do. So I try to just like mix and make them feel like I belong as well. I didn't want them feeling uncomfortable. Anyway, as the night went on, this guy smiled at me. I smiled back. He came and approached me and he started talking to me. We started talking about silly things. Bearing in mind, I don't know him. This is the first time I've ever actually set eyes on him. Anyway, he said he would like to get to know me, and he gave me his number. And I also gave him my number, which is weird because it's something that I never do. But whatever reason, I was very drawn to him. Anyway, I go home, I didn't think nothing of it. And I received a text message from him. He said, I was just checking to make sure that you're back home safely. And I said, yes, thank you very much for caring and checking on me. Anyway, he said, can I ring you? I was like, yeah. He rang me and we're talking. He's asking me questions. Then he said something very chilling. He asked if I have got my coat hung at the back of my chair. And he described the exact location where my chair is. I quickly sat up and I checked, because I'm wondering, how does he know this? And I asked him, yes, but how do you know this? And he said, he's just checking. You would have thought this would be the first alarm bells and to stop talking to this guy. But whatever reason, I just couldn't bring myself to stop talking to him. Weeks goes by and then we're still talking. Then one night he rang again and he said, what do I want? And I asked, what do you mean? He said, I know you feel very sad and you need something. You tell me and I'll make it happen. I laughed very nervously and I said, what do you mean? He said he knows that I need someone like a man and he can be just that for me. I was embarrassed, at the same time nervous and creeped out by the question. He proceeded to tell me that, can I feel the presence next to me on my bed? I was worried and he said, if I turn around and look next to my left, I will see that the bed is actually sunken in, like someone is sat on the bed. I asked him if he's actually stalking me. He said no. He laughed and said, it's just a joke. But I kid you not, when I turned and checked the bed, you know, when someone sits on the mattress and they get up and it starts to go back up again, this is what I saw. I quickly hung up the phone call. He rang again and he said he's really sorry. He didn't mean to creep me out. It was just a joke and it's nothing serious. Then he said, look under the bed. I might just be there. I said, cut it out. He said, it's just a joke. But tell me why. When I turned the lights on, the coat that was hung up at the back of my chair was gone. I could feel something touching my leg. This is when I screamed, because when I checked, it was him coming out of there. I ran out, screaming. I did not stay in my house for a whole week. I returned back, and everything was intact. It was as if no one had been there or even lived there. The coat was still hung up at the back of the chair. There was no presence in my house. I thought that was the end of it. Fast forward, I meet my now husband. It's lovely, he's fantastic, just like someone I have been wanting for many, many years. He's someone who understood me, who knows me, who is there for me, who comforts me, who gives me everything I want. But tell me why, one night, he said, do you remember the night I said I will be there for you? I'm what you have been looking for. I thought he's joking. I thought he was drunk. And I asked him, what are you talking about, babe? He said, do you remember the phone calls? Do you remember not on your coat disappearing from the back of your chair? Do you remember the hand that touched you from the bottom of the bed? That was me. People, this sent goosebumps down my spine. I did not know what to do. I was shaking, and I kid you not, I literally pissed myself. I ran out of there. But tell me why. When I decided to go back to my house, he was nowhere to be seen. I do not know who or what I was married to. Do you think you know what it is?
Hello and welcome back to a series of spooky stories, The Haunted Tea Spill. The series is brought to you by all things spooky and ungodly amounts of paranormal activity. Yes, also featuring the necklace that I was featuring last night, but with the second necklace that came with it. I didn't feel like putting it on, but I wanted to show you guys which one it was. These come together. They're stackable and they're super cute. Now onto the story. When I was 13, my older sister and I were gifted a Ouija board from a family friend. We were raised in a spiritual household, and it was gifted from a pagan woman, so we knew to treat and handle it with caution and respect. Well, thank God someone knows something about a fucking Ouija board. It's about damn time. I still don't support it, but at least you know. We made sure to always use a protection opening ritual as well as a cleansing closing ritual each use. We didn't use it often and always kept the questions simple. Okay, so now somebody's talking like they got some fucking sense. Fast forward to 17, I met my first husband when it said I would, and it even accurately predicted his name, and we went on to get married, and I had 2 daughters with him at the exact ages that it said I would. I rarely used the board as an adult. I was content using my tarot cards for basic divination. However, I decided to use the board again because I was curious, and this time it said that I needed to get out. Say less. It warned me of my husband and said that he would unalive me if I stayed. It said that it was watching over my daughters. So this is something specific. This is someone specific. Who is it? This was the first time I was freaked out by the board and proceeded to do my closing ritual, cleansed the board, and locked it up. However, I saw soon that it was right. My husband became violent and even began talking in unsettling detail of the ways that he wanted to unalive me and our daughters. And he attempted to poke me with a very sharp object to inflict pain. And I started finding homemade pipe bombs and other weapons that he was stashing around our property. Bitch! What the fuck? So it was hard and terrifying. That's an under-exaggeration. But thankfully, we made it out safe. My daughters were only 1 and 3 years old, and my oldest would tell me about seeing a woman who talked to her and kept her safe. Shitballs. Shitballs. This is freaky. I definitely believe if used incorrectly, Ouija boards are dangerous. Yes. Yeah, we know that. And even then, most often, just not worth the trouble, but mine saved me. I mean, period. It did. That's nuts. I'm now 34, happy with the man that the board predicted with my 2 daughters I mentioned, as well as my 2 stepdaughters. I'm forever grateful for my experience with it. Hell yeah, brother, because you wouldn't be here. And I'm very, very glad that you guys made it out safe. That is actually insane. Fuck, bro. Damn. I'm gonna be honest with you, the predictions were like, ooh, creepy. But the husband was the scariest part of this story, for sure. That's the real monster, you know? Rate on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being the least scary, creepy, spooky, 10 being the most. If you have a story of your own that you want to submit, you can do so on the link tree in my profile. Don't forget to follow my backup account. I'm saving money for a car. I'll see y'all at the next episode. Stay spooky, friends.
What would you do if you looked out into your backyard late at night and saw your elderly neighbor doing something that didn't make any sense? This is Scared with Jess, and today's story is about someone who said that they looked out into their backyard late at night and saw something that they just can't explain. I used to rent a small house at the end of a quiet street. It was one of those places where nothing much happened. The neighbor behind me was old, like really old, and I never knew their exact age, though I would have guessed late 80s. They lived alone in the house behind mine and mostly kept to themselves. I'd see them now and then bringing in mail or standing on the back step in a robe. We'd wave sometimes, but that was about it. Nothing about them stood out during the day. At night, though, I started hearing things. It began with little sounds outside after midnight. Rustling in the yard, a soft thump here and there. Once or twice I heard what sounded like somebody moving through dry leaves near the fence. I figured a raccoon or a cat or maybe someone's dog. I do live alone, so I'm careful, but I wasn't scared yet. Then one night I heard giggling. That's what finally got me to the window. It was late, a little after 2. I had been half asleep on the couch, and at first I thought the sound was from the TV, except the TV was off. It was coming from outside. It was quiet, like somebody was trying not to laugh too hard. I got up and looked out through the back window, and at first I couldn't make sense of what I was seeing. My neighbor was in my backyard, crouched low in the grass near the back fence, and their night clothes were hanging loose off them, and they were bent over something on the ground with both hands close in. Their shoulders were moving slightly, and I thought maybe they had fallen. That was honestly my first thought, that maybe they'd wandered over and collapsed and I was looking at somebody trying to get up. But then I heard chewing. It was slow and wet, and that little giggling sound again. I froze at the window. I still couldn't make out what they were crouched over because the yard was dark except for a little spill of light from my kitchen. I leaned closer to the glass. That was when they turned. There was blood all over their face, down the chin and around the mouth on the front of the night clothes. Their mouth was hanging open. It wasn't smiling, just open, and for a second I thought their eyes looked completely black. I still go back and forth on that because it was dark out and maybe I caught the reflection wrong, but I swear that's what I saw. Just black where the eyes should have been. I dropped straight down under the window. My whole body reacted before my brain did. I was crouched on the kitchen floor with my heart beating so hard it hurt, trying not to make a sound and hoping they hadn't seen me standing there. I stayed there like that for maybe 10 seconds, and then I slowly lifted myself back up and looked out again. The yard was empty, no neighbor, and nothing moving. Whatever had been in the grass was gone too. I stood there staring for a second, trying to decide whether I had just scared myself into seeing something stranger than what was really there. Then my front doorbell started ringing, over and over. Not one ring, not somebody polite at the door. I mean, hard, quick presses, one after another, like whoever was outside had their finger jabbing at it as fast as they could. I ran to the front of the house and checked the peephole. Nobody. I looked through the side window by the door, too, but nobody was on the porch and nobody was in the yard. The bells stopped, and I didn't sleep after that. The next morning, I looked out back, expecting to see some sign that would have made the whole thing make sense. A dead animal, or tracks, or maybe some torn up grass, something. There was a dark patch near the fence where my neighbor had been crouched, but I wasn't about to go kneel down in it for a closer look. I stayed on the patio and stared at it like that was somehow better. Around 10 that morning, I saw the neighbor outside in their own yard. Normal clothes and carrying a watering can. I watched from my kitchen window while they watered one of those little flower boxes by the back steps. At one point, they looked up and saw me. Then they waved. The same as always. I didn't wave back, and that second night I told myself I was not going to look. That lasted until the same time rolled around and I heard the giggling again. Quieter this time, but closer. I stood in the kitchen for a full minute arguing with myself and then went back to the back window and looked out. My neighbor was already there. Not crouched this time, standing in the yard facing the house, staring straight up at my window like they had been waiting for me to come look. The blood was still on them. It had dried darker down the front of the night clothes, but there was fresh blood around the mouth, enough that I could see it even from inside my house. In the eyes, I still can't swear to it fully, I wish I could, because that would almost be easier than sitting in the uncertainty. And from where I stood in that dark, they looked black again. No shine and no whites, just completely black. And I couldn't move. Then they lifted one hand and slowly waved. Not a normal wave either, stiff and just wrong looking. I backed away from the window, and I did not go near the front of the house that time. I just locked the back door and then checked every other door and window twice. I sat in my bedroom with the lamp on until daylight, and the next morning there was a note taped to my front door. Folded once, but smears of blood across the outside. I stared at it for a while before touching it. Inside, in shaky handwriting, it said, "Mind your business." I moved out 2 weeks later. I drove by that street once after dark, maybe a month after I left. I don't even know why. It was just morbid curiosity, I guess. And the house was still there. Porch light on, neighbor's yard quiet. Then I looked in the rear view and saw somebody standing at the edge of the old backyard, just past the fence line. And even from that distance, I could tell they were waving. Anyway, good luck sleeping tonight.
Halloween, year 2000, story time. That Halloween I was 15, so we paint our faces and get dressed up, and then all of us decide to walk down to the graveyard. Now this graveyard is located down a long dirt road, and I mean it's long, and it's fucking scary at night. Now I did not want to go to this graveyard because it was my family cemetery, and I knew a lot of bad people was buried there, but I didn't want to be a dork in front of my friends, so I went. And before we even got there, I had that feeling in the pit of my stomach, like don't go down there, but I didn't listen to it. So we're all walking down that long dirt road about 12 o'clock at night, and once we get to the graveyard, we see a man standing out next to a gravestone. So we watch this guy cry beside this grave for 4 or 5 minutes, and then he takes off walking towards the woods, not down the road, and then he just gone. My friends were like, probably somebody that stays through the woods, you know, the little paths through here. So we're all hanging out in the graveyard talking, and they're like looking at the graves and reading the names, and my friend Chelsea says, "Y'all want to have a seance?" And then she pulls out a flashlight from her pocketbook. She also had a little Toys R Us Ouija board with her too. She wanted to do this seance inside of the crypt where some of my family members are buried. You can walk in and out of it. I said, not just no, but hell no, I'm not going in that crypt. And she was like, oh my God, you're such a puss. Come on, Alicia, do it. Everybody else wants to do it but you. So I tell Chelsea, the only way I'll do this is if you put a rock in front of that door at the crypt, because that door was real heavy and sometimes it would get stuck and I didn't want to get locked in there. So the boys dig up this big, heavy, dirty rock and they put it in front of the crypt door, and now it's blocked open, so I'm not as scared, and we all go inside. Our other friend Tyler jumps up on top of the grave because they're like granite, like cement, and he starts jumping back and forth, and I said, dude, don't do that. What the hell's wrong with you? Why are y'all so disrespectful? Like, have you never been to a graveyard? Sit down on the ground. We sit down, and 1 or 2 of them's got flashlights, but Chelsea cuts hers on under her face and looks right at me and starts to seance. We're sitting there in the crypt, and Chelsea's like, I want to speak to the dead. Give me a sign. Can you hear me? But nothing happens. We didn't get no sign, and we're all just sitting there like talking and laughing. About 15 minutes in, I was like, look, I'm ready to go. I want to, start heading back towards the house. I'm getting hungry. Got a bunch of candy at home. And she was like, no. I said, why not? She said, because I got somebody in specific I want to contact. I said, who's that? She said, you know who? I said, I know you're not talking about who I think you're talking about. She said, yeah, I want to contact her. Now, I can't name this person on here. I would never do that to her family, but this was someone who we were very close with that had died a few months prior. So I said, no, Chelsea, I'm not doing that. I'm not going to try to contact her spirit. And the other guys were like, it ain't real. We just play along with her just so she can hurt and get it over with. I said, fine, do what you want to do. And then I grabbed my beer, and me and my boyfriend walked outside the crypt. So I'm showing my boyfriend my initials that are on this tree that I'd carved in there when I was a little kid. And we see this woman come walking down the long dirt road. What scared us so much about this woman was the way she looked. She had long dark hair, pale white skin. She was real skinny, wearing this real dark dress. It was so dark I could barely see it, but I could see her face. What was freaking me out the most was the way she was coming towards the graveyard. She wasn't walking or running. It was like a smooth, like the way you see them nuns float in scary movies. That was how she was coming down the dirt road. Had she been running, we would have heard the tap, 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 but she wasn't running. There was no sound. She was just like gliding. I stood up and I literally dropped my beer out of my hand. It was like my hand just lost control. And by the time I looked down and looked back up, she was within a few feet of the graveyard. Me and him back up behind the tree, and we're just standing there watching her as she comes into the graveyard and floats around these graves. I grabbed my face like, I gotta stop smoking. It's messing with my mind. I'm seeing things. And he said, no, I'm seeing it too. I said, probably because we're high. As she's making her way around these graves, she heads towards the crypt. And Chelsea's still doing the, give us a sign, give us a sign. And I said, Chelsea, y'all need to come out now. Come on. As soon as we said that, the crypt door went wham, slammed up against the crypt, and now they were stuck. So me and my boyfriend go running up to the door, and I'm like, dude, be careful. If that door falls, it'll squish you. It's that heavy. But they're on the inside of the crypt, like, let us out, open the door. And I'm like, dude, the door's stuck. That's why I propped it open. So we go find a bunch of sticks, but every stick that we try to use to pry the door back open breaks. My boyfriend finds and digs up a big piece of metal out of the woods, and he's taking that, trying to pry the door back open. And as he's like focusing on doing that, I'm looking around, and I see that woman pop up from behind the crypt. My gut is churning because I'm like, why is she looking at me? Her face scared the fuck out of me. She just had these eyes that felt like they looked right through me, like she would pierce me with them. So I watch her float up above the crypt and then float back down. And when I look around, she's gone. He's still prying on the door, and I'm just standing there looking out in the woods around, and that's when I see it. A bunch of little lights coming through the woods, coming towards the graveyard. But what scared me the most was I couldn't tell if these were lights or eyes. But there was just so many of them. It looked like there were hundreds coming through the woods. So I grabbed my boyfriend and say, look, oh my God, we need to hurry. And I grabbed the door and he grabs the door and they're on the inside pushing it and we're all trying to jimmy it and we get it open just enough to where they can start coming out. By the time they all got out, these lights were almost right on top of the graveyard. So everybody is now standing in the graveyard looking out into the woods at these lights and none of us can tell what it is. The closer these things get, the more we can hear the, what are you doing? Hey, like this whispering. They were definitely talking to each other. They were like, hey, what are you doing? Hey. My gut was telling me, get the fuck out of there right now. But Chelsea and her boyfriend were like, let's see what it is. Come on, let's get a little bit closer. I said, you go right ahead. I'm getting the fuck out of here. So me and my boyfriend take off running and we get halfway down the dirt road and his chest locks up because he's a smoker. He can't hardly run. And I'm like, dude, you better come on or I'll leave your ass here. I ain't even been dating you that long. I don't even love you like that. I will leave you. So we all take off running back down the dirt road and we get halfway down it. Everyone stops and looks and now all these lights are in the graveyard and they're still following us. Chelsea said, I wonder what that is. I said, I don't know, but I've heard about those lights before. My grandma's always talked about them, but I've never seen them until now. Mind you, I've been in that graveyard a lot. It was my family's graveyard, and I'd never seen those lights until Halloween. So we all take off running, and we get back home. Chelsea, her ass was haunted after that night. She would say something followed her home, and she even thought at one point it was the friend who died a few months prior because she tried to contact her. She would come to school so tired, bags under her eyes, like this, to the point where she stayed up all night long because these things were talking to her. One night, right before Christmas, Chelsea goes into her living room and she tells her parents that she'll see them later. And they're like, where are you going? She said, I'm going to be with that friend, the one who's dead. So they had her committed that night because they were scared she was going to unalive herself. And for about a year, Chelsea wasn't right. She did get back to normal and things got better for her, but during that time, it was really bad.
Good morning all. In light of the paranormal activity we recently had in our home and the odd occurrence since, I thought I'd just give you a little bit of a backstory of our first encounter of this and why I'm attributing it to the haunted objects I've collected in my house over the years. So the very first time we can put it down to something abnormal happening in the previous house was when I'd purchased a painting. Now it was of Wigan Town Centre, but from the 1920s I believe it was. And so the story went with it, the artist had took his own life and was found in the apartment, and that painting was there, and lo and behold it got passed to pillar after post and I eventually had it. So there always was a slight atmosphere about it, but I think that's kind of why I liked it when I first seen it. It felt like there was a bit of a backstory to it. It wasn't just an object, it was interesting. So anyway, we purchased this, say a week or two in. We'd made like a floor bed, we call it, next to the fire. It was in the winter. Loads of sheets down with a bar duvet and pillows and what have you. And we're watching just a normal film and had both fallen asleep. Anyway, we woke up about 1, 2 in the morning. All the lights were now off in the living room despite the fact they weren't when we went to sleep. The TV was like just on like a background sort of thing, as it would be, when a movie's finished playing. So that wasn't abnormal, but that was the only glow in the room, if you will. And we were actually awoken by an almighty crash, and it turned out it was this framed painting had randomly fallen off the wall after a fortnight despite being secured. It was put up really well, and when you looked at the back, the string connecting it to the nail was still completely intact as well. So almost like something had lifted it above the nail and it had crashed down to the floor. But it wasn't just that, the shock of being awoken by it. It was the incredibly awful atmosphere in the room. As I say, all the lights were now off. It was icy cold to the point you could see your breath. It shouldn't have been that cold in the house. And there was an uncomfortable, horrible atmosphere in the air. The pair of us waking up, neither of us wanted to get out the duvet to actually take ourselves up to bed and pick up the frame off the floor and lock the doors, do all the things you do before you go to sleep. I've never forgotten that, because even though crazier, wilder things have happened in the house since, that was really a case of feeling an atmosphere that was powerful and unsettling and frightening. So I just thought I'd give you a little bit of a sort of background in how these sorts of things began.
This girl sent me an email saying that she saw something absolutely terrifying in her house, and then it started mimicking her mother. It scared her so badly that she literally passed out. Chantel moved into a new house, and she said that a year before she moved into the house that she had paranormal things happen to her, but this was by far the worst thing that had ever happened to her. This was around November 20th of last year, and she was home alone because her mom and her boyfriend had gone to a bar in the city about an hour away. So it's around 10 or 11 p.m., and she got on a call with an online friend, and we're gonna call her Aisha for privacy reasons. They're just laughing, goofing off, having a good time, when suddenly Chantel starts to hear this and she's like, what? At first she thinks that it's her cat, and then she remembers something. Her cat ran away a week prior. So she perks up a little bit because she thinks that it's her missing cat, Pumpkin. And she tells Aisha to hold on for a second, and she goes over to the door. Despite the excitement of thinking that it was her cat, she started to get this really bad feeling right before she opened the door. Like her stomach dropped, but she just ignored this feeling. She opens the door, she doesn't see the cat. Her eyes kind of like drift around, and then they stop at the bottom of the yard. And then she saw it. It looked like a person with shoulder length, and she explained it as ratty black hair and white dirty rags hanging off of what looked like an extremely thin and tall body. That's when she felt it again. She said that it just felt like this extreme horror that just flooded her senses. She finally manages to kind of like stumble back, and she slams the door shut and she locks it really quickly, and she's just standing there trying to figure out and wrap her head around what she had just seen. After stammering for a couple of minutes, she finally manages to ask Aisha to please get her mom, because she was very close with her mom. So Aisha's mom gets on the phone, and she tells Aisha's mom what she had just seen. As she's explaining to Aisha's mom what she had just seen, she hears this tap, tap, tap on her window. So of course she starts panicking. At this point, Aisha's mom thinks that this is somebody that's trying to like break into her house or intrude in some way. So Aisha's mom tells her to get a shiny object and go lock herself in her room. That's what she does. Well, a little while passes by and nothing really happens, and so she does manage to fall asleep. Well, a little while later, she wakes up in the middle of the night, and she wakes up to this bang, 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 bang on her door. And she is frazzled at this point. So she goes and grabs her phone, and she looks at the time, and it's 1 a.m. and she's like, what is going on? Then she hears it. Bang, bang, bang. Chantal, open the door, in her mother's voice. She was absolutely horrified because her mother would have texted her if she was on her way home, and she wouldn't have been home till 4 a.m. So then she checks her mom's location. Her mom is still at the bar. While she's doing all of this, the banging is persisting, but as soon as she checks her mom's location, it just stops. So she's just sitting there in silence, just terrified. The silence is almost worse than the banging, and then she hears it. It's not in her mother's voice this time. It's in this low, raspy, weird voice, and it says, Chantal, open the door. She said that this did not sound human, and it did not have good intentions. She said she will remember that voice for the rest of her life. She said that immediately after she heard that voice, she just passed out. She wakes up the next morning, and she has scratches all down her back. So what did you guys think about that story? I know it was a little short, and you guys don't like short stories, but I thought it was a good story. That story was absolutely terrifying. I don't think that that was a mimic, by the way. I think that that was something far worse. But what do you guys think it was? Definitely was, since it was able to scratch her, not a good sign to me. I definitely think that that starts with a D, if you guys know what I mean, because I can't say it because I got in trouble. Drop all your thoughts, opinions, questions, suggestions down in the comments, but as always, please be respectful.
Oh my God, this poor kid. My heart would have been pounding out of my chest. If you were 10 years old and experienced what I'm about to tell you, I don't think you would have been able to sleep outside ever again in your life. All right, let me back up. I got another one for you out of the Appalachian Mountains. And before I get into it, I want to touch on something that I think about from time to time. If you've been following me for a while, you know that I've covered my fair share of Appalachia encounters. And what I notice is so many of these stories from completely different people, completely different states, even completely different decades, all share sort of creatures or a creature that are so similar to one another. It's always this grayish pale figure, really skinny, emaciated even, and gaunt. Sometimes tall with big red eyes, sometimes human-sized, but with black eyes and sharp teeth. Others have human-like teeth. I've read about claws and fish scales or just slimy in general. Some describe them walking upright, while others describe them as crawling on all fours. Some claim that they're immediately aggressive, and others claim that it sort of watches and waits and almost wants you to know it's there. And then people are calling these things all different names, and I want to know the breakdown. I've heard rake and wendigo. I have heard skinwalker. I have recently learned a new term, night crawler. And now I'm just like, well, which one is which? I heard this night crawler is in its own category. It's also pale, tall, and thin, and walks upright. It was first caught on a security camera in Fresno, California. And then it's been, or things like it have been reported ever since. I don't know if these are the same creature or different ones, but what I do know is there are far too many accounts from people all over the world describing these things. It's just too many to not be nothing, right? All right, enough of that. Here we go. Let's get into it. So this man says that when he was 10 years old, every summer their parents would take them to Meacham Lake Campground to camp for the entire summer. So the very first night that they're there, of course, he says that his parents had been drinking pretty heavily with friends and his uncle. And by the time everybody went into the tent to sleep, of course, all the adults just passed out right away. It was one big tent, so it was this child, his parents, and the uncle all in this tent. So he is laying there trying to fall asleep, and completely out of nowhere, this feeling of dread washes over him. He said it was just absolutely horrifying. His body went freezing cold, and it was like full panic mode. It was like every instinct in his body fired at once, telling him that something was deeply wrong. And then he heard it. At first, the sound of sticks breaking and snapping and leaves crunching, and then a deep billowing, panting sound. And it was getting closer and closer to the tent. He says he was so scared he could not speak, he could not move. He was absolutely frozen in fear. Which, yeah, me too, bud. And despite wanting to wake his parents up, he was too scared to make a sound, because whatever this thing was, if it hurt him, it was going to come inside and get him. So then this thing starts circling the tent. He says he could tell that this thing was walking upright because it was so close to the tent. It began dragging its body against the tent as it circled. He said it was like it wanted him to feel it there. It wanted him to know it was there. And he just keeps laying there, heart pounding so loud he can feel it in his throat, to the point where he could hear his heart beating, just listening to it circle again and again, almost like it was stalking him. Guys, this went on for hours, he said. After a while, he also noticed that his uncle's window was open, and he looked out to see if he could get a glimpse of whatever this thing was. And sure enough, as it passed by, he saw it. He said it was pale and emaciated looking, almost as if it had been starved down to nothing. It had no hair on its head, and its eyes were completely black. He said it didn't look like anything he had ever seen before, and not since. He said it wasn't an animal, and it wasn't a human. It was something else entirely. And it just kept circling, dragging its body against the tent all night until the sun came up. And then with the sunrise, it left. Once his parents and uncle woke up, still shaking, pale, and terrified, he told them what he heard and saw. And his parents didn't believe him, figured it was just a bad dream, which we need to normalize parents believing their children. But they said, I know what a bad dream is. This was not a bad dream. I was so exhausted from being up all night, terrified, that I slept that entire next day. They were awake every single second that night, with every single hair standing on end. He goes, you don't sleep all day from a bad dream. You sleep all day because you didn't sleep at all the night before. All right, I'm unleashing you in the comments. I gotta know your thoughts. Also, which cryptid do you think that this was? And maybe shed a little light for me on the differences between some of these. I hear so many things so often, and I just don't know what to make of it. All right, drop it down below. And if you have a creepy story of your own, you gotta share it. And if you're new here, definitely follow for more creepy story time.
Father was a very strange man who told me that he was abducted by extraterrestrials as a child, and I never believed him. I always thought he was kidding until I got older and realized that there were things about his behavior and things that he would say and do that I still have no explanation for. This is Kim's submission to Spooky Scary Storytime, and it does deal with some sensitive topics, so light trigger warning on this one. But Kim says that her dad, when she was little, told her that he was abducted, and she's like, that didn't happen. But she asked her grandmother about it, and she says, oh no, that happened. Kim's father was about 10 years old. He shared a bedroom with his two brothers. And one night, his mother, so Kim's grandmother, was having bunko night downstairs. And there were about 30 people in the kitchen and living room. And the only way that the boys who were sleeping upstairs could get out of the house was down the stairs and through the living room and out the front door. It had been a few hours since the kids had gone to bed, and Kim's grandmother was sure that they were asleep. But she was carrying on with her party, and then there was a knock at the front door. So she went to the front door and opened it, and there stood Kim's father. And he was shaking, and he was cold, and he was wet. And she goes, how did you get outside? And he said, somebody took me. And that he didn't remember anything else, that he had just woken up cold on the front lawn and decided to knock on the door to get back inside. Neither of his brothers could explain it either. They just said, we don't remember waking up. He was in the bed the last we remember. But the next day, Kim's dad had a strange bump on his ankle. It was a hard raised mole, and he claimed that he never had it before that day, and Kim's grandmother corroborated this story and said no, he never had it, but it stayed with him ever since. And he always joked with Kim that this was something that the extraterrestrials left to track him. As I mentioned, Kim never believed this story. She thought it was just a fun thing that her father and grandmother had created to entertain her. But the family moved to Texas when Kim was a preteen, and she noticed that her father grew stranger. He would repeat the same phrases over and over when she asked him a question. So she would be like, where's my bike? And he would be like, it's in the shed, it's in the shed, it's in the shed. And she never really knew what was going on with it. When she brought it up to her mother would just say, oh, he's getting older, he's stressed out. More and more, he would just stare off and seem gone. Night, Kim woke up and she wanted to go downstairs to the kitchen to grab some water. And when she walked downstairs, she noticed that her father's office light was on. So she peeked her head in, was going to say hi, but noticed that he wasn't anywhere in the room. Figured he went to bed, and so she switched off the light. She went in the kitchen to get her water, and as she was filling up her glass, her father came walking out of the office, and he said, why did you turn my light off? I was still working. And she said, I just peeked my head in there to see where you were, but you weren't in there, so I thought you went to bed and forgot to switch off the light. And he just said, leave my light on, and he left it at that. Little things like that continued to happen, but they were small enough things that Kim never really thought about it twice. Another example happened one day when she was in the bathroom and the light started flickering. So she turned off the lights and went to get another light bulb from the hallway closet where they kept the spares. As she was walking down the hallway, her father came downstairs with a light bulb in his hand, and he said, here, use this one. He hadn't even mentioned what she was going to go do. There were a lot of instances in which he seemed to be able to read either her or her mother's mind. She moved out when she was 17, and one day her mother called her crying because her father had lost his job and thus his retirement. She said, I don't know what's going on, but he's getting meaner, and I keep finding burner phones all over the house, and he won't tell me what they're for. One day, Kim's mother called her crying again because her father had hit her mother. And this was the first time that this had happened, but her mother had been complaining about him getting meaner, and so they called the police. He was arrested and taken to jail for a mental assessment, which he passed with flying colors. Showed back up at the house, and her mother had no choice but to let him back in because she said that he had no money and nowhere else to go. But they were struggling with him still not working, and they eventually sold their house. After they sold their house and moved into a new one, apparently her dad just up and left. He didn't show up to the divorce proceedings, and he didn't show up to court. No one knew where he had gone, so her mother got everything. Was still angry at him for how he treated her mother, and they just assumed that he had mental issues and went off to live his life somewhere else. But in 2021, Kim was on a social media platform and she saw his profile pop up in the People You May Know. I thought this was strange because he had always been very anti-social media, but she clicked on the profile, checked it out, and it did look like him. So she went to message him, only to find that he had already sent her a message request that she hadn't seen. So she opened it up, and he was basically saying, I'm so sorry. Can you please give me a call? I would love to talk to you and explain where I've been. Refused to answer any questions that she had for him on the social media platform, so she reluctantly agreed to a call. But when they got on the call, she says it was very strange. There was almost robotic beeping in the background. It sounded like my father's voice, but also robotic. Like he didn't talk the way that he used to. He proceeded to tell her a very odd story about how he disappeared from the house and he woke up on the side of the street in Las Vegas and a nurse took him in. He says, well, how did you get to Las Vegas? And he would not answer the question. And then he says, how is your son? This caught Kim off guard because she hadn't mentioned to him that she had a son, but thought maybe he saw it on my social media platform. And she says, oh, he's good. And he says, yeah, I'm so happy to be a grandfather. When is the next one due? Is it March or is it April? And this shook Kim because she had not mentioned to him, or anyone else for that matter, that she was pregnant with her second child. She was so weirded out by the conversation and the clicking in the background that she hung up the call. And proceeded to message her on the social media platform again, asking for her mother's address because he said he wanted to reconcile with her and explain where he's been all this time. Kim said she didn't offer it out of fear for her mother's safety, and she never heard from him again. And since that happened, his mother, so her grandmother, has passed away, as well as his brother. He did not show up for either of the funerals. Nobody in the family has heard from him, and she has no idea where he is. She said there's a lot more strange things that happened as I was growing up, but it's way too much to write out. He said, so I can understand a mental health break, but I still can't explain how he knew the things that he did. Her name has been changed, but she'll be seeing the comments. Let her know what you think was going on here.
Let's talk about more of the most haunted roads in Florida. If you don't know me, I started the trend on TikTok several years ago of talking about the weird things that go on in Ocala National Forest. And back when I first started telling these stories, people were very angry about it. They threatened me to stop telling the stories. They said I had no right to, and they wanted me to stop sharing these legends and stories of the forest for whatever reason. I obviously didn't listen because I find them fascinating and important, and now several years later, it has become a trend for people to share stories about Ocala National Forest. And luckily, they no longer receive threats over it. I've noticed a lot of stories about Ocala National Forest involve stories about Florida State Road 40 because it cuts directly through the forest. I've had so many people tell me stories about phantom lights chasing them on State Road 40, and they'll pull over to try to let the lights pass thinking it's another car, and the lights will vanish only to get behind them when they pull back onto the road. I've heard so many stories about the Watchers, which are kind of like shadow figures that will hide behind trees a lot of the time and watch people as they drive by on that road. And the Watchers are all throughout this forest. There are also a lot of stories about the Rainbow People or other groups like them trying to stop motorists late at night. They'll act like they're broken down on the side of 40, and if you stop for them and try to help them, they will do God knows what to you. Speaking of me being the one who started the trend about talking about Ocala National Forest, a huge creator on this app several months ago said the Rainbow People were a paranormal phenomena or something. And I just have to say, that is fucking ridiculous. Please get your facts straight. What is that? Now, the number one rule of driving through Ocala National Forest, whether you're going east to west or west to east, is that you fill up gas before you get on 40. That is the last road on earth that you want to break down on. Other than the small back roads that wind all throughout Ocala National Forest, but that is a completely different animal that you need to be prepared for. But if you're just passing through that forest, you need to make sure that you have gas and that your car can get you through without breaking down. A lot of the people who write to me about driving on 40 are truckers, and they say they will see weird animals late at night, as well as a woman in white who is always barefoot walking along 40. I also had a man who lives along 40 send me a story recently saying that he leaves for work around 4:30 a.m. every morning, and he would look out and always see a man on a bicycle riding by his house. One morning, he's leaving for work earlier than he usually does, so he goes to his car and he looks and he sees the man on the bicycle going by his house. He runs to the edge of his driveway after the bicyclist, and when he gets there, he's not there. There is nobody on the road. The craziest part is he's not even the only person who has reported seeing this man on a bicycle on 40 at 4 a.m. To me, this sounds a lot like it was somebody who lost his life on 40, and now he is doomed to just repeat that morning for eternity. Nothing else really makes sense when you consider the fact that he disappears if people try to chase after him or talk to him. One of my personal favorite stories of that road, though, came from a couple that was driving on 40 late at night. The husband is driving while the wife is dozing. It's the middle of the night, and all of a sudden she hears, oh my God, what the fuck is that? She jerks awake and looks, and she sees what looks like a gigantic wolf blended with a man running in the road ahead of them. I find this really interesting because I have a vested interest in the dogmen of Ocala National Forest as well as another Florida town. It apparently had ran out into the road in front of the truck and then began running in front of them, like away from the truck, and the husband slowed down and came to a stop. The wolf kept running for a few yards and then stopped, turned around, and stood up on two legs. She said the fur was a dark gray color and it looked like there was blood or something matted in it in certain areas. She said it looked so human-like, and then as it got back down onto all fours, its nose somehow elongated until it just looked like a normal, gigantic wolf. It then turned and ran back into the forest. Y'all, they're not the only people to have seen dogmen or other weird creatures out in that forest, not by a long shot. This video is already getting very long, so please let me know if you would like more stories about State Road 40 or if you want to hear about more haunted roads in Florida.
There's something in the woods that you have to watch out for. Now, they've been seen across the world. They are very much real, and we've been documenting them for years. They are called crawlers. Imagine, if you will, an 8-foot tall human-like creature that is tall, skinny. Its bones are protruding through the skin. It has these long, dangly fingers, sharp teeth, solid black eyes. They call it the crawler because it's often seen crawling on all fours on the ground. This thing walks very awkwardly. It has big joints, and it's seen on rooftops, up in trees. A lot of times people report it being out in the forest at night or in abandoned buildings. And one thing is for certain, anyone who has an encounter with these entities, it often ends up bad. Now, there was a story out of Boone County, Kentucky. There was this father. He had 2 sons, and he worked third shift. He would leave his younger son home with the older son, and he never had any issue. Until one night, his 2 sons are alone, and they started to hear scratching at the back door. So the older son, he goes around to the door and he flips on the back light. And as it illuminates the yard, they see this tall, dangly, pale white creature moving around, trying to go into the window. So the older brother grabs the younger brother and they run into the bedroom and they lock the door. The father comes home and he finds them terrified. And so he goes out and he searches the property. He doesn't find anything except for these very long, weird looking footprints. So he knows that something had visited the house. He doesn't want to leave his sons alone anymore, but he has to go to work. So he talks to the neighbor, who agrees to keep an eye on them. Couple weeks after this, the 2 boys are alone. And they start to see that there is a storm coming in. They could see the lightning and the thunder. So the older brother knew he needed to bring the dogs inside. So he goes out into the yard and he starts calling for the 2 dogs. He hears them barking, but he doesn't see them anywhere. That's when he turns, he realizes the dogs are inside the house. So he runs back inside, he grabs his younger brother, and he takes him into the bathroom, and he locks the door. And as he's sitting there, holding on to his younger brother, he remembers, I didn't lock the back door. All of a sudden, they hear this back door open. And then they begin to hear a set of 4 footsteps walking on the floor. Boom, 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 boom. And it's making its way down the hallway towards the bathroom where they are at. Then it goes quiet. And then they hear something shaking the handle. And eventually, whatever this was, it gets the door open. The older brother runs towards the door and he starts pushing it shut. But this thing sticks its long, white, bald head with solid black eyes into this door. And it's looking right at them. And this older brother's pushing as hard as he can, trying to close this door. All of a sudden, it takes its head back out. and it runs out of the house and it goes out the back door. And just at that time, the neighbor comes running in and he grabs the boys and he says, "You're coming to our house. There was something trying to go into your house and get you." So he takes them back to his house. And when the father finds out about all of this, he decides they can no longer live there. He moves the next day.
Have you ever heard the old saying, you shouldn't step or stand on a grave? Now, there was this young adult named Barry. And Barry and his friends decided they wanted to go out to the cemetery one night. Now, this cemetery was known to be haunted, and there were all these stories and legends. So him and his buddies, they go to the cemetery, and they're walking around with flashlights, kind of scaring each other. And he said that he was walking on the graves, and one of his friends said, "Hey Barry, like, you shouldn't walk on top of the graves or stand on them, like it's bad luck." And Barry said, "What are you talking about? Like, I don't believe in any of that." So he starts stomping on this grave and then like spits on it and is like, what's going to happen to me? A ghost going to get me? So he said, while they were in the cemetery, nothing really happened. So he didn't think anything of stepping on the grave or anything. Well, when he got back home, he just had kind of this bad feeling that maybe he shouldn't have done that. And so when he got to his house, he goes inside and his girlfriend is in the kitchen and she's cooking a big meal. Barry says, "Hey, what's up?" and stuff. And she goes, "Where'd you go?" And he goes, "Oh, I went out to the cemetery with some of my buddies." Well, as he's talking to his girlfriend, he sees someone standing behind her. And he's like, who's behind you? And she's like, "What do you mean?" And he's like, do you have a guy in the house or something? Like, who's behind you? And she looks around and she's like, "What are you talking about? There's no one behind me." And he said, there's a guy standing behind you. And like, she couldn't see him, but he could see this guy, like, and he was wearing a flannel and jeans and boots. And he had just this very pale, long face, this brown kind of shaggy hair, and a, longer kind of beard. And he's just standing behind his wife. And, Barry's kind of like, "What's going on? Like, you don't see that?" And she's like, "No, I don't. You're starting to scare me." So Barry's like, whatever. He goes out of the room. He comes back. He doesn't see the guy anymore. And so that night, right, he is laying in bed and his girlfriend's right next to him. He is just like tossing and turning because he can't really sleep because he's thinking about, what happened at the cemetery. And when he turns over towards where his girlfriend's sleeping, he sees this man, the same man he's seen behind his girlfriend. And he is in between him and his girlfriend. And he jumps out of bed and he's like, "What the heck? Who are you? Who are you? What are you doing here?" And his wife's like, or his girlfriend's like, what do you mean? Like, what are you talking about? Like, what's going on? And he's like, "Who's the man in the bed?" And she's like, "There's no man in the bed." And so like, he walks out of the room and is like, I can't handle this. He comes back into the room to apologize to his girlfriend and check to see if that he can still see this guy, and the guy's not in there. And for like weeks, he was like seeing this guy standing behind his girlfriend. And so he said he got in his car one night, he drove to the cemetery, and he went back to that grave that he had stomped on, and he apologized and was like, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to disrespect you, and like, I hope you can forgive me and leave me alone." And he said, like, all of a sudden he just got this overwhelming feeling like everything was going to be okay. And he went back home and he didn't see this guy anymore.
Have you noticed how we've not built any new cemeteries? Like, any city, town you go to, they still have the same cemeteries they've had for hundreds of years. And people pass away all the time, yet these cemeteries never seem to fill up. There are always open plots of land where you can bury someone. So where are the bodies? Where are they going? What's happening to them? I've got this interesting theory that I've heard. Now, in the 1970s, there was this movie called Soylent Green. Now, Soylent Green was this movie starring Charlton Heston, and it was about this futuristic city in which the world had become overpopulated. They had destroyed the oceans, they had destroyed the earth, and times were really rough. And none of the people in the city could afford to buy any groceries. They couldn't afford just the normal things we get every day at the store. So, in order to keep them from starving,
they were sold this very cheap stuff that was made in the factory. It was like a squared cracker or ration, and it was called Soylent Green or yellow or red. And the people, because they were hungry, because they were starving, they would protest like every day. They would go out into the streets and have these huge protests. But these trucks would come around and they would pick them up and take them away. And all these people were like disappearing. So Charlton Heston's character, who is this detective, he starts investigating this mysterious case, which leads him to the factory where they make this Soylent Green. And what he discovers is that the Soylent Green is made from humans. And when you kind of look around now, right, the same things are happening that happened in that movie, right? We're slowly destroying the oceans, the earth. Groceries have become unaffordable. They are now a luxury to most. And you wonder, the foods that we're getting that are so cheap that we're able to afford to buy, the only stuff that we can eat, what is it made of? Now, I'm curious what you think. Why do you think we are not building any new cemeteries?
Might have known the story of real-life boogeyman.
I used to have a temporary job of organizing someone's house until I realized that she was keeping records of me. I would go into people's homes and I would help them sort boxes, declutter, take things to storage. One client that I had was an older woman and she lived alone, and her house was very, very neat, like unusually neat. Everything had its place and it was always there. Everything was labeled. Everything was almost too perfect. She told me that she hired me to go help her with her basement. She said that she hadn't been in her basement in years, which felt a little weird because the rest of her house was completely spotless. So I go downstairs and it's not even messy. Everything is clean. Boxes are stacked neatly. Everything has a place. Shelves are labeled. It literally looked like somebody had just gone through it. But she insisted that I help her go through the boxes again, so I do. And I start opening them up and taking things out, and everything's looking normal. Most of them just have old clothes, books, papers, those kinds of things. I grabbed one box and it wasn't labeled. I opened it up and it had a bunch of folders in it. Each one is labeled with a date, so I pick one up and I open it, and there are notes in it about me. My name, my schedule, the days that I had been coming into her house, when I would arrive, what I would wear, and when I would leave. Like crazy little details. I closed it up and I opened up another folder, and that one too was about me, and it had so many details and descriptions. It was like somebody was following me or watching me before I even started this job. And then in the back, like underneath this box, there were more folders. Not all of them were about me, but there were like multiple of other people with the same notes, descriptions, like going way back. I put everything back in the box, I restacked it, and I went to go upstairs to go and leave, and she was standing at the top of the stairs and she said, "Did you find everything that you needed to?" I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded and I said, "Yeah, I'm so sorry, I have to leave early. I have like a family emergency." And she just kind of nodded. She didn't ask any questions, and she said, "That's okay. I've already learned what I needed to." I never went back to that house, and a couple of weeks later, I got another call for my organizing job, and it was a different name and it was a different house. And when I showed up, it was the same lady. I immediately just left. I didn't say anything. When she opened the door, I left with all of my things, and I'm now currently looking for a new job.
I have a creepy story time. If this is the type of content that you're into, feel free to follow along. I post a scary story every single day. The person who submitted this wishes to remain anonymous, so for the sake of the story, let's call him Victor. Now, Victor is a medium, which means that he is able to help people who have recently lost a loved one in order to deliver a message, or if they're having any type of experiences in their home. Back in 2006, him, his wife, and daughter had recently moved to Texas. Around this time is when they came across a family that were having issues in their home. It started off very small, like pictures falling off the wall, dishes were being moved, and keys were going missing, but nothing too crazy, just mainly annoying. But as time went on, it started to get worse. Victor was called, so he decided to go over there and take a walk around. The minute Victor walked into this house, he felt it. Now, this family had 2 young children. One was about 4, the other one was 6. So Victor suggested that they lay baby powder on the ground to try to eliminate some of the noises and the things going missing, to see if it was maybe the kids messing around. The next day at about 9 a.m., Victor gets a call from the family. He ends up going to the house. When he walks in, they show him one of the rooms where they lay the baby powder, and very clearly in cursive, the name Casey has been written out. Now, Casey happened to be Victor's daughter's name, and there was no way that anyone in the house could have been the one to write it out because there were no footsteps around the name, one, and two, no one in the house knew his daughter's name. So Victor asked the family, "You guys know anyone by the name of Casey?" The family all responds with, "No, we don't know anyone by that name." Victor then tells the family that he cannot help them and starts to quickly leave the house. The family, of course, asks, "Why can't you help us? And who's Casey?" Victor explains to them that Casey is his daughter's name. And the fact that his daughter's name was written in cursive on the ground to him is a warning. Victor believed that this was the D word that was trying to come after him because he was helping the family.
I need to tell you guys this ghost story. This story was sent into my email, and if you have any ghost stories, paranormal encounters, or scary stories that you want to share, you can send them to the email in my bio. It stood over my bed and was smiling down at me. I was 13 at the time, and even now, I can't be sure if what I saw was a ghost or something darker, something that had been watching me long before I ever noticed it. This all happened in our old home. I won't start the story by lying and saying that the home had once been warm and inviting. The truth of it is that something about that house always had felt off, even before this night. Up until this experience, though, I had always just been able to ignore it. The feeling that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up. I constantly told myself that it was an old house, making old house noises. The floors creaking, the pipes groaning, the house settling, everything being perfectly explainable. Until the night my best friend stayed over. At the time, she was 2 years younger than me, and we were doing what girls do at sleepovers, laughing too late, talking about stupid things, and eventually falling asleep long after we should have. One thing to note was that my bedroom in this house was strange. It was huge for a kid's room, and in one corner, behind this massive shelving structure, I kept my cello. You couldn't even really see it. This shelf covered it completely, but that detail matters. At exactly 3 a.m., I felt someone shaking me awake, hard and urgent. I opened my eyes and saw my friend was sitting upright beside me, absolutely horrified and shaking. She couldn't even speak, and when I asked her what was going on, she just pointed her trembling finger slowly toward the corner of the bedroom. And when I looked, the blood in my body turned to ice. There was a figure standing there, impossibly tall, its head cocked to the side at the neck in order to even fit within my walls, so tall that if it had ears, one would be pressed right up against my ceiling. It was darker than the darkness around it, a shape cut out of shadow that had no reason to be in this room, and it was dressed almost like a man in an old suit. This huge hat that felt too wide. The entire thing felt impossible and exaggerated, something imagined up by fear, like overdoing how terrifying it needed to be presented to two little girls. But the worst part was its face. It was smiling, stretched, and unnatural. A Cheshire cat grin. Kind of smile that very clearly doesn't belong on something human. And it was looking directly at us, watching us intently. I remember looking back at my friend, and she was staring at it too, which cemented in my brain that what I was seeing wasn't a dream, and I wasn't imagining it. We were both seeing what was there. I wanted to scream for my parents. I remember opening my mouth, and right before a whisper of air could leave, everything went black. Like something shut me out from the rest of the world. Like I fainted or went unconscious. And when I woke up, morning light was coming through the curtains. I was drenched in sweat, my heart pounding, and for a second I thought maybe it was all a nightmare. Maybe sleep paralysis, maybe my mind playing tricks on me, anything to explain what had happened. I turned over and found my friend awake next to me, so to confirm what I was hoping, I asked, "Do you remember last night?" And she looked at me confused. No memory. Nothing. She asked if I was okay. As I tried to feel happy with the news that maybe I really just had imagined everything. I remembered every detail, though. That hat, the grin, how impossibly tall it was. And not only all of that, but something else disturbed me even more. When I looked at my friend during that night, there was something different about her, too. I
can't explain it, but she looked vacant. Not herself. She was wrong. And I thought, what if she saw it and then forgot? Or worse, what if she didn't forget? And something made sure that she would. I never felt alone in that house after that. Sometimes at night, I'd wake up and refuse to look toward that corner, because part of me still believed that if I looked at it, he would be there, waiting, still smiling at me. Years later, I heard people start to describe what they called the Hatman, this towering, shadowy figure seen at night, wearing a hat, watching from corners.
Do you know that we have many World War II bunkers scattered throughout Trinidad and Tobago? So throughout Trinidad and Tobago, you will find these bunkers and these towers. So for example, in Cedros, in Station Bay, in Labray, in Plaisance, that's in Marabella, in Tucker Valley, in Monos Islands, you would find these ammunition bunkers and the towers. And now this was in World War II. Trinidad and Tobago at the point in time was a colony of Britain and one of the biggest suppliers of airplane fuel during the World War. Because of this, Germany was pretty upset and Trinidad became a target. Now, Germany would have sent something called the U-boats, which was an underwater boat or like a submarine, which would destroy hundreds and hundreds of merchant ships. These merchant ships were carrying supplies of oil. So it was 400 merchant ships that sank, and out of the 400, 80 of those ships were in Trinidad waters. 80 of those ships sank right in and around Trinidad and Tobago because of Germany. So the Americans needed to find strategic points to basically defend the Point of Air refinery. So they put up all of these bunkers that you would have seen from way down in the points of South all the way up to Chagaramas. Hence the reason why we have so many relics of bunkers that are now being taken over by nature. I did not know Trinidad and Tobago played such an important role in World War II, nor did I know that we were one of their biggest suppliers of aircraft and warcraft fuel. So let me know, did you know about Trinidad and Tobago's involvement and history in World War II? And if you all want a little more in-depth story about World War II and Trinidad and Tobago, let me know.